Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we are continuing on right now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days. The topic of day 4 is equity, and like we talk about in the book, this is one of these concepts you hear about all the time in poker and even out of poker. So out of poker, you hear about a home equity line of credit, how much equity you have in a car, equities as an asset class. So it's really important to understand that all it means, both in and out of poker, is your ownership in something and how much you rightfully own of it in some sense. So definition is in poker, your share of a pot or a tournament. So one question you might have is, well, how is that measured? And you can express that in different ways. So let's say we're playing a tournament pot that's 500 chips. We could say we have 40% equity in that pot, and that'll be the same as saying that our equity is 200 chips. Or if we're playing a cash game, maybe the pot is 20 bucks, and we're flipped to win 50% equity, so we have $10 worth of equity. Another example is they're playing a 9-man sit and go. We could say we have $10 worth of equity, and that might be the equivalent of saying 20% of that sit and go's prize pool. And we're going to talk about equity in all of these ways and give examples of this concept coming up. And this applies to every single format of poker that you're going to play. So of course in no limit hold'em, but let's say you want to play Raz. Now I don't know why you would want to play Raz, but if you did, Raz has equity. You have different equity on different streets. You can have equity versus ranges. So this is a universal concept that's going to apply to any format of poker. And equity is what we want to maximize. So let me give examples of something we don't want to maximize. You don't want to maximize the likelihood you cash in a tournament. Instead, you want to maximize your equity in that tournament. And in the section on ICM, we're going to talk about exactly how to do that. You don't want to maximize how often you win a pot. You want to maximize your equity in that pot. So this is a really important distinction. And again, plenty of examples of this idea to come. But that's what we want to do. We want to maximize equity. Now, I'm guessing that most of you guys have heard of plus EV. And even if you don't know the exact definition of that, maybe you do, but the key thing is that when people say that, they mean maximizing their equity. So an action is plus EV means you gain equity by taking it. These are equivalent ways of expressing the same thing, that you gain equity or an action is plus EV. So the other topic that we talk about, and we're going to go back to this initial type of equity and how to calculate it, but it's really important we talk about fold equity. And all this means is how likely it is that our opponent folds. So most of the time you want to maximize fold equity. For example, if you're bluffing, then you want as much fold equity as possible. Occasionally you want to minimize fold equity. So let's say you flop quads. In that case, fold equity is a bad thing. You want as much action as possible. But in most contexts, we're going to be talking about fold equity as a good thing. You may say, well, why is it such a good thing? And imagine that we have, say, 50% equity in a pot. In that case, if we get our opponent to fold, we win the entire pot. Our equity has gone up from 50% to 100%. So the reason why fold equity is such an important thing, and this goes back to why aggressive play is such a strong concept, is because whatever equity you have in a pot, that equity goes up to 100% if you win. So fold equity is vital. Now to calculate equity, you can do this by hand, you can do it with pencil and paper, but not many people are going to do it that way. So the best way to do it is normally going to be with software. And we're going to go back to ICMizer, and that's an example of paid software. It's very good software, but I want to start off by looking at free software. So we're going to look at an example in Equilab. So you can Google Equilab and download the software for free, and all it's going to do is give you equities, and it's going to express these equities as a percent. So let's imagine first of all that we're pre-flop. So we have a hand like 10-9 of spades versus pocket threes. So it's going to give these equities, and all these equities are the percent that each hand is going to win. So we expect this to be basically a flip, And actually the suited connectors are a slight favorite because they have that straight and that flush potential, but approximately speaking, a flip. And you can also do this after the flop. So we can say, well, what if it's a blank flop? Okay, so here's a totally blank flop. So deuce, deuce, deuce. And in this case, of course, the pocket threes are now the favorite. 10-9 suited is going to have to pair. So it's got about 30% equity. It's going to win approximately 30% of the time. So those are equivalent ways of saying it. And if we knew the pot size, let's say this is a pot that's 100 chips. 30% equity is saying that 30 chips are rightfully this player's in some sense, and the remainder belong to this player. We can also do equity versus a range. So in order to do that, let's say that one player has pocket threes, and the other player will go back to pre-flop. So if you don't specify flop, turn, or river, the default is going to be pre-flop. And it's very easy to specify a range. You can just drag this, and you can take hands in or out. Okay, so you don't want the person to have aces or kings, you can take those out. If you think, hey, this guy, you know what, he loves 10-4 offsuit. He thinks that's a lucky hand. I've never heard of anyone where that's the case. But maybe that person exists. You can just add in that hand. So we have this range of hands. Like we know from last time, that means that this player's actions are consistent with all hands in that range. And we can say what equity does pocket threes have against that range. All that means is that if this player has one of these hands, we have pocket threes, and this were to repeat over and over and over, on balance, we would win 47% of the time, i.e. we have 47% equity. Kind of funny, actually, because against 10-9 suited, I believe that was our same percent. And the wider the range, so let's say, for example, we increase this to being a range of almost anything, and our equity should increase a little bit. So you can play around with this. It's cool to use to get an idea for different equities, and that's a really nice way of doing that. Now we're going to look at ICMizer and look at a few hands that give us an idea of equities. So these are going to be hands from a $5 9-man sitting go. And let's begin. So here the button flats, calls the raise, and Hero elects to re-raise in the small blind with King-Queen offsuit, and the button calls. So what is this telling us? We happen to know the button's exact hand. That means that this hand will get to showdown, so ICMizer can display the exact hands that both players have. So this guy is approximately, has 59% equity. These don't add up exactly to 100% because there's some chance that they end up splitting the pot. But roughly speaking, we might think 60% equity, 40% equity. So all this means is that pre-flop, Ace-Jack offsuit is likely to have the best hand by the river about 60% of the time against the King-Queen offsuit. And these equities, like we know, change every street. So one other thing about this, the current pot is 447 chips, and that means Hero's equity is 40% of that. So 180 chips, or whatever it equates to, is Hero's equity expressed in chips. And now the equity is more than flip-flop. Hero is flop top pair, and villain Zanika is still live. He can pair, he can hit a gut shot, he can hit 2 cards to a flush. So he's got 28% equity, and Hero has 72% equity. So those are the equities now. And whatever the next card is, they change. So now this card is a blank. It doesn't change the texture. It doesn't really change if one person is ahead and then a deuce hits, usually who's going to be ahead. So we call this a blank. And Hero now is 86% equity. And calls. And now with the river, we always are going to have one of two things. Either this player is going to have 100% equity and this player has 0% equity, or vice versa, unless it's a split. So that's a last case where both players have 50% equity. Okay, so you have to either have the winner or the loser. In this case, Hero has the winner, so Hero has all 1,143 chips of equity. Let's look at another example. And here, Hero has already folded. So this is going to be a battle of the Ace-Jacks, Ace-Jack offsuit versus Ace-Jack offsuit. And like we've seen or talked about, there's the possibility of a split pot. So here, the equities don't up to anything close to 100% because these are the possibility of winning the pot outright. So this is how ICMizer is going to handle equity in that case. And this player has a greater chance of that because he has the higher spades. So for spades come, he's going to win the pot. For hearts come, he's going to win the pot. And this person needs 4 diamonds to come. And then the majority of the time, what do we expect to happen at the flop? We expect that the equities are going to go to 50% and 50%, or equivalently 0% and 0%. So that's another way of expressing the same thing, but no player has the possibility of winning. And so that's how you'll occasionally see these done with the split pot scenarios. So here we have another instance where hero is folded, and I'm going to give you guys your big quiz question for today. And first, as usual, we'll play out this hand, even though we're going to be interested in one street in particular. But let's check this out. So the cutoff raises, the button re-raises, button bets, the turn gets checked, the river gets checked, and the button, the cutoff wins with his illustrious King-9 offsuit. So what I want to talk about is the flop. And here are the questions that I have for you guys. Okay, so listen to the questions, then pause the video, come up with your answers, and I'll give you the correct answers. So 4-part question. Number 1, what is Kildonk's equity in percentage terms? Okay, what percent equity does he have? Next question is, what is his equity in chips? Third question, if I said to you Kildonk has a lot of fold equity, would you agree with me? And the last question, if Kildonk bets and Ralph folds, then how much equity would Kildonk gain in chips? So think about those 4 questions, and I will give you my answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. First question was, what is Kildonk's equity in percent? And this is going to be, I think, the most straightforward one. We know ICMizer gives us the equities, so these percents of winning, same as the percent equity. So Kildonk's equity in percent is 8.8%. Now we want to know which is equity in chips. And to do that, let me go ahead and pull up a calculator. So his equity in chips is going to be his percent equity, which here we have as 8.8%, which is the same as 0.088. And as I recall, the pot was 531 chips. So that means that his rightful share of this pot is about 47 chips. If you said 46 or anything right about here, that works. Important thing is that you know the process, but this is Kildonk's equity in chips. Next, if I said he has a lot of fold equity, would you agree with me? Answer is no. You would say, Moshman, you don't know what you're talking about. Ralph has top pair, and you know what? Fine, it's possible. You never know what will happen. But a lot of fold equity means that if he bets, then his opponent is going to fold most of the time. You should not expect someone with top pair to fold. So the answer to this third part is no. You should not agree with me if I said he had a lot of fold equity betting this flop. And the last question is, if Kildonk bet and Ralph folded, how much equity would Kildonk gain expressed in chips? And this is the most complicated one. If you have a little bit of trouble with this one, don't worry, I'm going to explain it. And again, the important thing is that once I do explain it, even if you had some difficulty initially, you understand at that point. Okay, so if he bets and his opponent folds, his equity goes from about 9% to 100%. He drags this entire 531 chip pot. Okay, so this would be a fantastic outcome for him if he bet and his opponent folded. So his equity at that stage would be 531 chips. And we said that his current equity is 47 chips. So he would gain 484 chips in equity. So that's his current 47 chips going up to 531 chips. That difference is going to be his equity gain. So those are the answers to today's quiz questions. And that's going to end it for right now. Tomorrow we have another very cool topic, pot odds and expected value, with expected value tying in a lot to equity. So it's pretty cool. And we're going to end here. Thanks very much for watching. This has been Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com and the Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days course, along with Katie Dozier. Thanks, guys.